Hi, I'm Matt Hutcheson with Seed Consultants, and we're here today to take a look at the general condition of the crop in east central Indiana. While you're driving down the road, you may see certain conditions as you look at your fields, but it's important to get out in the fields and walk around. So today we're here to look at the condition of the crop, potential yield robbers, some issues that may be showing up, and discuss what we have to look for throughout the rest of the season. As we looked at this field from the road, it really looked pretty good, but once we walked out into it, we found a few issues that we want to bring some attention to. We're in an area here where there was heavy water flow flowing through the field and some stunted plants due to rain. And even where the plants aren't stunted, one concern is with all the rainy weather we've had that there's going to be some potential for nitrogen loss, and we can see a few plants here where the leaves are starting to turn yellow and die. You can tell if it's nitrogen loss, it starts as a V at the tip of the leaf and works down towards the plant. So we've probably got some denitrification or nitrogen leaching here. So even in areas where plants aren't severely stunted due to the wet weather, there's probably some nitrogen loss that may end up hurting the yield as well. We're just going to take a look at this ear here on this stunted plant. We'll look at some better ears in other parts of the field. But here where we've got some nitrogen loss and stunting due to rainy weather and ponding in this field, we're going to take a hit on our yield potential. While the kernel rows and length may be there, the loss of nitrogen will definitely affect how that ear fills out as the season progresses. We're going to take a look at an ear on another plant in a part of the field where conditions have been better. We've pulled a couple ears off these plants and counted 16 to 18 kernel rows around. If we continue to have good growing conditions and these ears continue to fill out, there's still good potential for very good yields where the field has not been affected by heavy rains and ponding and some of the other issues we've seen this spring. We walked to a few different areas in this cornfield we're in today, and we dug up a couple plants. One plant from one of the stressed areas where there's been a lot of water ponding and definitely saturated soil, and one from an area that's better drained and where the corn is not stunted and looks like it has a much better yield potential. As we look at these roots on the stunted plant, it's pretty hard to get the shovel in the ground. Looks like we've got some compaction here just due to the rainy, wet weather we've had this spring from the pounding rains and the saturated soils. It's hard to dig that plant out, and it doesn't look like the roots have gone down very far. They're more just spread out in the top couple inches of soil. On the better looking plant, the roots were able to penetrate the soil farther. The soil is much more loose. It was easy to get the shovel in the ground, and as a result, the root system is much better. So it's something to keep in mind when you're walking your fields. Take a shovel and dig up roots. You can identify areas where you may have compaction, something you may want to address in the fall after harvest. It really gives you a good idea of what's out there. And when you see stunting above the ground, you can kind of identify why you have it by digging up the plants and looking below the surface. Although we've seen some stunted areas of this field and some areas that are obviously going to take a hit in terms of yield, we pulled a couple ears from better parts of the field. Counted as many as 18 kernel rows around, 16 on some other ears. And as we continue in the season, if we have good growing weather, there's still good yield potential out there. The overall yield of the field is obviously going to be affected by the worst areas, the stunted areas due to our wet weather we've had this year. But the important thing to keep in mind is there's still potential for very good yields in the areas of the field that weren't affected. Another concern this time of year is leaf diseases. We pulled a couple leaves here from this field. Overall, this field looks pretty healthy. We were able to find some northern corn leaf blight, which is easy to identify by the cigar-shaped lesion. Although walking this big section of this field here that we're in, I was only able to find one lesion, so not much pressure in terms of northern here. Another concern that we've seen this year is rust. We've seen more common rust this year than we normally do, so that's identifiable by the rust pustules. Common rust will have rust pustules on top of the leaf and also under the leaf. You'll feel raised areas of the leaf, and it can be confused sometimes with gray leaf spot if the pustules are off the leaf and it's just the lesion, but pretty easily identifiable if you take a pocket guide in the field with you. Another concern in certain areas of the state, especially in the south, is southern rust, which normally affects the southern growing regions of the country. But this year the weather has allowed that southern rust to move up. A few weeks ago we heard reports of it in Kentucky, and as recently as this week we heard reports of southern rust in southern Indiana. So for those growing areas, you definitely want to get out and scout your field. Southern rust has a potential to do more yield damage than common rust. Although your seed company may have ratings for their hybrids, you want to make sure you know which hybrids are susceptible, and this is the time of year to decide whether or not you're going to need to make a fungicide application to keep that southern rust from doing damage to your yield. When you look at leaf diseases and the potential for yield loss, the important thing to keep in mind is you want to protect the plant at the ear leaf and above. If you see leaf diseases spreading rapidly and starting to cover the leaves at the ear and above, that's when it becomes a concern for significant yield loss. The important thing to do is to keep that top of the plant clean, because that's where a significant amount of the yield comes from. You want to make sure those upper leaves are clean, and if you start to see significant growth of lesions up the plant and onto those upper leaves, you want to consider making a fungicide application. We've moved on to a bean field to take a look at how the soybean crop is performing in the east central part of the state. And so we're going to walk through this field. We've dug up a couple plants and discuss the overall condition of the crop and what it looks like right now and what we have to expect for the rest of the season. As with cornfields in this area, bean fields are very variable. There's some good areas. There's areas where water laid, or were ponded, where plants were drowned out and killed, or where we saw some diseases such as Phytophthora that ended up killing plants. Where the fields weren't affected, there's still very good potential for yield as long as we continue to have good growing conditions and rains as we move into fall. But there will be some areas that take a yield hit due to the early wet weather we had this season. In this field we dug up a couple plants. Very healthy root system. This is from one of the better areas of the field. You can see the root system is healthy, goes fairly deep, no compaction issues here. The root nodules fixing nitrogen are on the plant, and they're working. You can tell that by squeezing them, if they have a reddish color when you squeeze them. But the root system here looks very good, and the plants above ground look good. They're progressing along well. But there are some areas that are variable where we've got some issues, some stunted growth or some missing plants due to the weather we've had this year. One commonly understood aspect about soybeans is that yield is made in August with rains. And so as we look forward to the rest of the year, if we continue to get rains and adequate moisture throughout the month of August as we head towards fall, that can be a big help in terms of getting soybean yields this fall. We will see some of the areas that were impacted by adverse weather will obviously take a yield hit, but if we continue to have weather that promotes good growth and rain and moisture during pod fill, then we will end up with yields that are acceptable in other areas of the field. As we look forward to management practices for the rest of the year, we want to continue to scout. We want to look for diseases. There's not any diseases to speak of here that would warrant a fungicide application. However, we've heard other growing areas, typically as you move south, there's been some sightings of frog eye leaf spot in certain areas. And also another thing to keep in mind is pests. We want to keep an eye on what kind of insect damage we have going on. In this field here, there's not a lot. There is some minor Japanese beetle feeding, and you can pretty easily identify that because they eat the tissue between the veins on the leaf, and it leaves kind of a web where the veins are once they've done their damage. As far as other pests in this field, we can't really find any, but it's always good to walk your fields and make sure you know what's going on. If you would get into a situation where you need to spray a fungicide for a disease or a pesticide for an insect problem, then you know what you need to do and you have the information you need to make that decision. I'm Matt Hutcheson, Product Manager with Seed Consultants. Whether it's a corn or soybean field, we want to remind you that it's important to keep scouting. Make sure you know what's going on in your fields, identify pests or potential yield robbing issues. We'll hope for better weather between now and harvest. Thanks for watching today, and we'll catch up with you in August.